First things first, if it's your first time here, my name is Priscilla and I talk about faith, purpose, and marriage. You're welcome to my YouTube channel. If you haven't yet subscribed, maybe this is the time for you to click on that subscribe button and on the bell just beside it so that you get to be notified anytime I post new videos like this. So you see, there are usually a lot of stories. We hear people share their stories of how we met, but you often hear people talk about how they didn't love the person that God led them to, how the person did not really meet their criteria or did not really fit into the kind of spouse that they wanted to have. I'm not going to say that people are telling lies. If you are going to be honest, most of these stories are true. But I feel like we misunderstand these stories, and so it creates some sort of fear and some sort of misconception around this whole topic of God's will. This is one of the reasons that I wrote an entire book on the topic, Understanding God's Will for My Life. What does it mean? What does God's will mean? Because I feel like one of the reasons that we have a lot of failed marriages and a lot of unhappy marriages among Christians today is because many people from the onset did not really understand what God's will means, and there are so many people who actually chose God's will in quotes out of fear or just for the mere fact that they grew up in an environment where they were told you need to marry in God's will, but because there was no real understanding of what God's will is in the first place, some of the decisions were not made on the right basis. To be honest, that's the truth for so many people. So one of the things that I want to address today is this whole thing of I didn't like the spouse that God led me to. I didn't love him at first and all of that. As I said, these stories have an iota of truth, and you can't tell people to change their stories just because it creates fear in you. But what you can do is to try to understand, oh, okay, what does it mean? What actually really happened? This is what I want to talk about today. So you've probably heard me share, even though I haven't actually taken my time to really go into details. I hope to do that soon as the Lord permits, how I actually knew that my husband was the one and some of the things that came with it. I know that so many of you are actually eager to hear it. So one of the things that I've noticed growing up as young women, we usually have a whole picture of how we want our marriages to look like. And to be honest, it's not exactly what it is. The way I said it sounded so nice. Yes, we have a picture of how we want our marriages to look like, but most of us have a picture of how we want our spouse to look like. These are two different things. So you probably, have told yourself that you want a spouse who looks a certain way, maybe works in a certain place or stuff like that. So what happens now when you are ready to get married, or when you are getting to that stage where you're like, I'm ready to settle down, and you begin to pray and want the Lord to lead you, is maybe the person that God sends your way does not exactly fit the picture that you have. So you begin to ask yourself questions. God, don't you like me? Why are you sending me someone who doesn't look like the one that I've been dreaming of having? I've always dreamt of having someone who is this tall. This person looks shorter. As a matter of fact, I've said it before, one of the things that I've learned when it comes to this whole process of getting married in the will of God and doing God's will in general is that it will reveal to you part of you that you didn't know existed. This is why the word of God is like a mirror. And if you really want to do God's will, you would have to learn how to surrender. There is no God's will without surrender. It doesn't mean that God is going to deprive you of things that you love. We'll get there. So for me, I never really wrote a list of things that I wanted to see in my spouse, especially when it came to the physical attributes. Because for me, those are minor things. I was really majoring on for me, the most important stuff was the spiritual part and all the other things, the values. I have a whole video where I spoke about some of these things. I will link it up so that you can check it out after this video. But I really did not focus on those physical things. But when it was time for me to actually choose a life partner, I realized that somehow, I think I wanted a tall person. I don't know what exactly I meant by that. But the first time that I saw my husband, and after I saw him and went back home to sit down and begin to analyze the whole thing, one of the things that came to mind was, I think he's short. It's funny. For those of you who know my husband, you know he's not a short person. But that was one of the first things that came to mind. And I believe that this is kind of the process that many ladies go through after they have been led to someone. So they now go and analyze the person, and they now begin to realize that they had some desires, they had some things. For some of you who have written a list, or who even have the list in your mind, this is where the list pops up and you're like, God, it doesn't fit this picture. So this is where a lot of people say that they didn't love the person that God led them to. But one of the things that I have learned, even in my personal journey, is you need to get to that point where you really ask yourself hard questions. And I've also shot a video on that. Why do you want the things that you want, the things that you wrote, especially those physical attributes? Why do you want them? Most often than not, our desires come from the things that we've seen, the things that we've heard, whether it's on TV, some of these TV shows and stuff like that. So we have a picture of who the ideal man should look like physically, not really because this is how the ideal man should look like, but because this is what we've been told he needs to look like. So when it doesn't fit that picture, you kind of feel disappointed then, because you are thinking, when my friends see this man, how would they perceive him? It doesn't really fit the perfect picture of who the ideal and handsome, good-looking man should look like. So many of us actually get to a point where we are face to face with our desires, face to face with the kind of things that we've desired to see in our spouse. But this is where you need to ask yourself, why do I want that? Why do I feel this way? For me, when I took my time to really understand, I realized that it wasn't about his height, and I will talk about that some other time. My thing wasn't really about his height. I was dealing with some other things, and I got to know that because I had to sit down and ask myself some real questions. And so it's not a case of God is going to give you someone that you don't love, because later on, as I said, it was actually really funny, because later on I realized that my husband wasn't short, and that wasn't what the issue was. So sometimes you allow these things to becloud your judgment, even if God was not to get involved. Some of these things that we write, I want him to be this, I want him to look like this, can actually becloud your judgment. They can make it difficult for you to focus on the real thing, which is where a lot of us actually miss it, because we begin to focus on the superficial, so much so that we lose sight of the real thing, of the real things that we should be looking out for when praying for a life partner. So it makes it difficult for some people to actually even embrace the kind of spouse that they have. And I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. This is one of the reasons that many people struggle in their marriage. Because if I offer you a gift wrapped, and you don't take your time to actually appreciate the gift, it's going to be difficult for you to enjoy the gift. It's going to be difficult for you to appreciate the gift. This is how it is even with marriage. If you don't take time to appreciate the spouse that you have, and when I talk about appreciating him, I'm talking about his physical outlook and stuff like that, it's going to be difficult for you to enjoy him. It's going to be difficult for you to relate to him the way you should, and there's going to be a mental block somewhere that is going to make it difficult for you to enjoy your marriage. So would God give you someone that you don't love? The answer is no, because the word of God makes it so clear, and there are so many passages that talk about that. One of them is the common one that we know, for I know the plans that I have for you. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. And then there's this other passage where Jesus gives us a story, a parable, and it tells us that if you, being evil, being wicked, you know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more your heavenly Father. Now, one of the things I want you to understand is God knows who you need more than you do. He knows who you need more than you do. He knows the kind of gifts that you love. He's the one who made you. He's the one who created you. He knows the kind of partner that will be suitable for you. In the beginning, when you go back to Genesis, when God brought Eve, or before God brought Eve, he said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him an helpmeet suitable. So God knows he's not just bringing anybody. He's not just bringing a man. He's bringing a man that is suitable. But you are going to come face to face with the reality of your desires that may not necessarily be founded. you will come face to face with that. I've had friends who, in fact, I have this friend, we've planned to actually shoot a video together, but she'll make it work. But I remember back in the days, we used to talk about how we wanted our spouses to look like and stuff like that. And the day she actually told me about the man that she was coming to get married to, it was the opposite of the description that she was giving. Do you understand? So in that case, probably even for her, she had to come to the point of surrender. It doesn't mean that the person God gave her is someone that she wouldn't love. We need to define, what we mean actually. And this is one of the things that I personally usually would take my clients through. There are so many things that we hold on to so dearly that are not founded. So it would take a process of even getting to understand your motives, getting to know yourself better, to actually appreciate certain things. So this is what usually happens. So the person that she introduced didn't look anything, physically, like the kind of man that she said she wanted to be with. But she was sharing this story and was saying, this is the man for me, this is the man for me. And it looked like, okay. Do you understand? So for anyone who is probably even in this situation where you feel like, God, I don't love this person, I want you to actually sit down and ask yourself, what exactly don't you love with the person? Because sometimes you don't even take your time to look at the person and know the person. You are using your how do you call that? You are using your predefined metrics, which are not necessarily the right ones, or which are not necessarily based on the right thing, to analyze or to look at this person. But I need you to sit down with yourself and ask yourself those real questions. Why do I feel like this is not the type of person that I want to be with? Why don't I love him? And you need to come to a place where you understand and value the person and know that this is the person that I want to be with, not out of I'm being compelled to. I have no choice, because I've heard a story like that as well. So like, I'm going into this marriage just because I think it is God's will. God's will is not a bitter pill that it gives us to swallow. So you need to deal with it before you go into it. Deal with it, deal with yourself. And if you are not ready to accept, one of the things that I know, which I also mentioned in my book, Understanding Gospel for My Life, is the fact that God will not force anybody on you. He won't. So if you don't come to that place of realization where you're like, yes, this person is the person for me, I love him, I like him, and I want to spend the rest of my life with him, don't go into it and later say, I went into it because it is God's will. You need to actually define and understand what this thing means. So if you still do not really understand what God's will is, because one of the mistakes that people make as well is to think that God's will is really just limited to marriage, and this is another sermon altogether. You yourself need to understand God's will for your life before we even talk about marriage. That would help you to appreciate this whole God's will even in the area of marriage better. So I would like to encourage you to get a copy of my best-selling book, Understanding God's Will for My Life, to dig deeper and really understand what God's will means and what God's will for your life is before you understand God's will for you in the area of marriage. So God will not give you somebody that you won't love. God will give you somebody that you will love. But you need to go through a process of understanding why you want what you want, and a process where you surrender to the will of God, which is the best for you. But you need to see it that way. You need to understand it that way before you say yes. Don't say yes out of, I don't have a choice. God has given you a choice, and he never will force anybody on you. So I hope that I have helped you understand this. Another thing that I want to say, by the way, is some people actually get exactly what it is that they wanted. As in, some people they are like, oh, I wanted a tall, dark person. Some people get it. It really is not a matter of when you say you want a tall person, then God is going to give you a short person because you need to accept his will. That is not how it works. I didn't even get a short person anyway, but as I said, I realized that my thing wasn't really a height thing. There was something else. I will share that later, but you need to understand that it doesn't work like that. I want white, then God will give me black because I need to accept his will. No, it doesn't work like that. Some people get what they want, like the way they want it exactly. And some people will now realize later that God gave them what they wanted. No, God gave them what they needed, but they were so focused on other things that actually did not really make sense. So at the end of the day, God will give you the best. God will give you what is good for you, because He's a good God. He's a good Father. So if you are still in that place where you are confused about who the one is, who is that person that I should say yes to, get a copy of my book, Understanding God's Will for My Life, and sit with it. I go into details, step by step, how to understand God's will for your life, how to know God's will for you in the area of marriage. I promise you that it is explained in a way that you probably haven't heard before. And it's very important that you understand this whole concept of God's will before you can actually really embrace what it is. I want to end by saying that understanding God's will for you and choosing the person that you want to settle down with, following God's leading, is first of all for you. And I'll shoot a video on that to explain that. It's first of all for you. It's for your own good. Because you don't want to be in a situation where you look back and regret why you chose the person. But understanding God's will also make you realize that it's not a by force kind of thing. It's a choice that you have to make based on understanding. That's why the title of my book is Understanding. That part I feel usually misses out when you talk about God's will. So thank you so much for watching today's video. You already know how I feel about marriage. I love beautiful, happy and purposeful marriages. So I want you to choose right, and I want you to prepare to have a beautiful, lasting and purposeful marriage. If you haven't yet joined my YouTube family, click on that subscribe button before you leave. Make sure you share this video with your friends and loved ones, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.